Chapter 4 Questions. I woke up early, the weight of yesterday still lingering in my mind. Crossing the room, I splashed cold water onto my face from the basin, the shock of it clearing the last traces of sleep. I dressed quickly, the castle's quiet pressing around me like fog. I walked to Keenan's quarters along the eastern wall of the castle where the windows overlooked the sea. The silence was broken only by the faint rustle of banners stirred by the draught. I passed a pair of guards who nodded respectfully as I made my way to his door. After a brief knock, I stepped into Keenan's room and found him standing by the window, his silhouette framed by the morning light. He gazed out with a wistful expression, his posture relaxed but distant. Curious, I joined him, my eyes drawn to the breathtaking sunrise spilling over the distant ocean. The horizon blazed with hues of gold and crimson, the sky painted like a living tapestry. For a long moment we stood in silence, wrapped in the quiet awe of it. Without turning, Keenan spoke softly. "Do you ever just stop and notice how beautiful this world is?" I looked at him, surprised by the sudden sentiment. He seemed lost in thought, his voice tinged with something deeper. But then he shook his head, breaking from the reverie. Turning to me with a grin, he said, "Well, I suppose you're here for answers." He chuckled. "Too bad. We're supposed to head to breakfast, and there will be no answers on an empty stomach." I laughed. "All right, you stubborn mule. Let's get breakfast." He grinned, and together we left the room, following a guard through the winding corridors to the great dining hall. The hall was vast and awe-inspiring, its high-vaulted ceiling supported by ancient timber beams, each one intricately carved with swirling patterns and symbols I didn't recognize. Massive stone walls rose around us, adorned with rich tapestries that added warmth and grandeur. A long oak banquet table stretched down the center, polished to gleam and set with golden goblets, fine pewter plates, and elegant candelabras. The table was laden with an impressive spread, roasted meats glistening with herbs, freshly baked breads still steaming, platters of ripe fruits, creamy cheeses, and gilded pitchers filled with wine and mead. Above us, iron chandeliers hung from the ceiling, their candles flickering gently. Sunlight poured through tall windows, casting a warm glow that shimmered across the room. The light danced over suits of armor displayed along the walls and the polished metal of ceremonial weapons. A roaring fireplace, large enough to walk into, dominated one side of the hall. Its flames crackled and filled the space with heat and the faint tang of burning wood. Servants moved swiftly and quietly, attending to every detail with practiced grace. The air was rich with the aroma of spiced meats, fresh herbs, and warm bread. "Whoa," Keenan muttered, smiling as he took in the scene. "I could get used to this." I chuckled. "No, you'd get fat." He shot me a glare, snorting, "And you wouldn't?" We both laughed as we made our way to the table. At its center, Brom stood waiting, his grin as warm as the fire behind him. "My friends, come and sit," the king called out. "We were just wondering if you'd snuck out, or decided to sleep the day away." Keenan and I joined the table, both of us impressed by the feast laid out before us. Keenan, however, looked noticeably uneasy as the servants bustled around him, setting his place, pouring his drink, fussing over every detail. I suppressed a grin, knowing he wasn't used to this kind of attention. Perseus noticed too. He glanced at me, and we both tried not to laugh. The king waited patiently, his gaze steady, as the last goblet was filled and the final plate set. Then, with a subtle nod to a nearby guard, the man moved swiftly to relay the order. One by one, the remaining servants and guards exited the hall. The heavy doors at both ends closed with a deep, resonant thud that echoed through the vaulted chamber. Brom took his seat at the table. To his right sat Queen Erindra, regal and composed, with Kara beside her, swinging her legs beneath the chair. On his left was Perseus, upright and attentive, then Keenan, and finally me. Behind the king stood Victus, silent and vigilant, his sharp eyes sweeping the room. But my attention was drawn to a figure I didn't recognize, a tall, dignified elf standing near one of the arched windows. He seemed lost in thought, his posture serene, his presence quietly commanding. Noticing my gaze, Brom said, "Ah, I believe you are acquainted with everyone here except our emissary from the elves, Thalion." The elf turned slightly and offered a polite nod, but said nothing. Keenan leaned forward. "How is Rannoch?" Brom's face lit with warmth. "He's resting. The healers say he'll be up and about in a day or two." Whatever you did worked wonders, not just on the wound, but his recovery as well. Keenan smiled, visibly relieved. I'm glad he's going to be okay. We all are, Brahm agreed. Then, with a playful glint in her eye, Arinder added, I'm doing fine as well, thank you very much. Keenan's eyes widened in alarm. I'm sorry, I just thought, you looked fine and I didn't want to, he shot me a helpless look, the classic I'm drowning, help me expression. I couldn't help it, I burst out laughing. Brahm and Perseus chuckled too. Still smiling, Brahm placed a hand on his wife's shoulder. She'll keep you on your toes. Arindra's eyes sparkled with amusement, clearly enjoying how flustered she'd made him. Keenan sighed in defeat, and she offered him a gracious smile as Brahm chuckled again. I glanced around. Where's Rieger? Brahm answered. He helped question Annie last night, then left to deliver the update to the elves. Since he's been present in both cities during the attacks, he can give them a more direct report. He said he'll meet you back in Grissom City this evening or tomorrow morning. I sighed, disappointed. I had questions for Rieger, questions that would have to wait. Arindra, or Erin as Brahm often called her, broke the brief silence, turning to Keenan. In all seriousness, thank you for saving my life, she said, her voice soft but sincere. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. Keenan flushed a deeper shade of red, clearly unaccustomed to such direct gratitude. You're welcome, he mumbled, barely audible. Brahm laughed heartily. Well, why don't you two eat while I explain a few things? But first, you'll need to swear an oath of silence. Nothing said here, especially concerning my wife or daughter, must leave this room. Keenan and I exchanged a glance, curiosity sharpening. He scanned the faces around the table, his expression cautious, weighing trust. The silence stretched, then with a subtle nod to me, he spoke. We agree. Brahm's expression grew solemn. Excellent. He leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering. The air in the room seemed to still. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the alien watching us intently. His gaze was piercing, calculating, measuring us as surely as we had measured him. I looked away, hiding a knowing smile. The king stood and began to pace slowly at the end of the table. When he stopped, his eyes softened as they settled on Arindra. I would do anything for her, he said quietly. 1,000 deaths, torture, pain, whatever it takes to keep her safe. Then Brahm turned his gaze back to us and his expression darkened. And yet, she is more powerful than anyone I've ever known, he said quietly. She could kill all of us with a flick of her wrist or a whisper. Keenan and I exchanged a glance, our faces tightening as we tried to mask our surprise. Fixing us with a steady stare, the king asked, Have you ever read about the Great War, the forming and the fracture of the world? I shrugged, not really. Though I thought, most of what I've seen written by people who weren't there. How do we know if any of it's true? Keenan added, I know very little other than what I read during Paladin training. Just that some humans rebelled and sided with demons according to the legend. That's how Noctari were created. Brahm nodded. That much is true. But what isn't widely known is this. The demons created a bloodline among humans, a lineage capable of channeling their dark energy. Those individuals became conduits for evil, wielding powers with devastating results. He paused, his eyes shadowed with sorrow. Arindra reached out and placed a gentle hand on his arm. Encouraged, he drew a slow breath and continued. Most of them burned out quickly. Their life force was consumed by the very power they wielded. The more they tapped into it, the faster it devoured them. Each time they used their abilities, they lost a piece of their humanity, becoming more demonic, more feral, until they were no longer human at all. In the end, they turned into monsters, their bodies spent, and then they simply died. His voice wavered. My wife is of this bloodline. Keenan and I stared at him, stunned. The weight of the revelation settled over us like a storm cloud. The king's voice softened as he spoke of the past. When I found her, she was barely holding on to what remained of herself. She nearly burned through everything. My friends and family all told me to stay away, but I couldn't. I fell in love with her. He smiled faintly, the memory bittersweet. It took years, but she recovered enough to live a mostly normal life. Still, if she ever uses her powers again, she might lose herself completely. Arinder leaned her head against his shoulder, her presence grounding him. We have to keep her safe, he said. Not just for her sake, but because keeping her safe keeps all of us safe. Arindra turned to us, her voice calm and resolute. I am not afraid to die. Every day I live here is a gift, one more day I never expected. Her gaze shifted to her daughter. I could destroy this entire castle and city in seconds, she said, her tone flat, matter of fact. It would consume me completely, but I could do it. I glanced at Keenan. He was clearly shaken, though trying hard not to show it. I felt the same. 2 days ago I would have thought she was mad. Now, after everything I've seen in the last 24 hours, I was ready to believe almost anything. If you have the bloodline, I asked slowly, does that mean your children have it too? The king and queen exchanged a glance before Brahm answered. We weren't sure. Honestly, we thought the bloodline had ended. None of the boys showed any signs, and even when Kara was born, there was nothing unusual. But around her 10th birthday, she started exhibiting abilities we couldn't explain, things no normal human could do. At first, we thought she was cursed, or under some kind of spell. We'd forgotten about the bloodline. It wasn't until we consulted Reggie after several sessions that he confirmed what we feared. We are that bloodline, Arindra said quietly, and it's passed to Kara. Wait, Keenan cut in. Reggie? Brahm smiled. Yes, the mage who lives in the mage tower on the southern end of the island. I blinked. The southern end? You're kidding, right? He chuckled. Well, the southwestern end. The southeast is too dangerous if you believe the stories. I thought of the rumors. Noctari and wild creatures said to roam the southeastern wilds, making the region supposedly impassable. So you're saying some old man lives out there? I asked incredulously. The king laughed. Not just an old man. An ancient tower full of mages. Keenan and I exchanged stunned looks. How is that possible? Keenan asked. Yeah, I added. I thought no one could survive out there. They've cloaked themselves with powerful magic, Brahm said, grinning. I don't know how it works, but Kara's been training with them for the past 3 years. I shook my head, trying to process it all. How many more surprises am I in for? What's Reggie like? Keenan asked. Brahm paused, then chuckled. That's something you'll have to find out for yourselves. It's not my story to tell. His smile lingered, touched by something fond or perhaps funny. Wait, I said, the realization hitting me. Kara is part of that bloodline, and she's been using her powers a lot over the last few days. How is she not being ruined by it? The king's expression darkened. We don't know. Reggie thinks she's some kind of anomaly, something special. A lot of the history he's uncovered is incomplete, burned, lost, or deliberately erased. But so far, Kara hasn't shown any of the usual side effects. None that we've seen, at least. Dad, Kara cut in, shaking her head with an exasperation only a child can summon when they think their parents should know better. You're forgetting the most important part. Brahm looked at her, puzzled. Good magic, she said simply. Brahm and Arindra exchanged knowing smiles as Kara continued. I can use good magic, healing, teleportation, protection, even some illusion spells. Brahm gave her a sideways glance. Although I hear you're not taking your illusion training very seriously, young lady, he added, feigning sternness. Kara rolled her eyes. Reggie talks too much, she muttered, which sent Keenan and me into a fit of poorly stifled laughter. So, Arindra, I asked, curious, you can't use those kinds of magic? She shook her head, her expression tinged with sadness. No, I can't. That's one of the things that makes Kara different. We don't know why, but she's able to use both light and dark magic. It shouldn't be possible, but somehow she can. Keenan turned to Brahm. Is that why this so-called Order of Light is targeting your wife? Yes, Brahm said, his voice heavy. We hope to keep Arindra's identity and Kara's abilities a secret, but somehow they found out about Aaron. The Order's goal is to eradicate magic entirely. They've been hunting Reggie for years, but he's always 5 or 6 steps ahead. They believe all magic, light or dark, will one day destroy the world just as it nearly did during the fracturing. But your wife agreed not to use her powers, Keenan pointed out. Why should they be worried? Ha! That's exactly what I said, Brahm growled, thumping his fist on the table in frustration. Perseus, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. I've been working to quietly root them out, he said, but their network is vast, spread across the entire island and beyond. It wouldn't surprise me if they've gained allies among the elves and dwarves, though likely not many. Those with longer lifespans tend to be more even-tempered. The alien spoke for the first time, his voice calm but firm. Be vigilant of everyone, he said, even me. Trust your friends, but never give them reason to doubt you. Be cautious and always make sure your actions can be verified. Perseus nodded and Brahm chuckled. You should write that down. The alien gave a faint smile. I'm over 1,000 years old. Who says I haven't? The king laughed, and even Victus allowed himself a rare smile. But then the king's expression darkened as he turned to his wife. Annie was rescued from slavers 10 years ago, he said quietly. She's been a loyal member of our household ever since. The fact that they got to her, he trailed off, shaking his head. It's unsettling. How is she? I asked softly. Arindra answered, her voice gentle. I spent the night with her in Rieger. She's broken. She believes she did the right thing, but never intended to hurt us. It's tearing her apart. Her gaze drifted, distant and sorrowful. I told her I forgave her, and she just collapsed sobbing, saying she failed in every way. I reminded her that things happen as they must, but now she'll have to reconcile what they taught her and what her heart and mind know to be true. Keenan nodded slowly. It's strange. We were warned about them during paladin training. They're trying to recruit paladins to help eliminate magic, claiming paladin magic is somehow acceptable. Our leader believes they just use us to do their dirty work, then discard us when we're no longer useful, maybe even enslave us. No one really knows. Perseus nodded. Yes, that lines up with what I've heard. They're desperate to bring a paladin or two into their ranks. It would give them a veneer of legitimacy. By now, we'd finished eating and were preparing to leave when Brahm leaned forward, his gaze settling on Keenan. If you don't mind, he said, his tone serious, I have one last question. Something Aaron and I have been wondering. Keenan nodded, cautious. What would you like to know? The king's expression softened, though his eyes remained intent. How does a Naktari become a paladin and learn to bring the dead back to life? Keenan offered a faint smile. Necromancy is strictly forbidden, he began, and even if it weren't, it can't reattach a soul once it's gone. At best, you'd end up with a walking corpse. The king nodded. All right, then. What about someone who's nearly dead? She was dying. She had seconds left. Keenan smiled. Well, that's a bit of a story. Brahm glanced at Arindra, who gave a small nod. He turned back to Keenan with a warm smile. We've got time if you don't mind. Keenan leaned back slightly, gathering his thoughts. Then he began. He spoke of being rescued by strangers as a child and left at an orphanage in Grissom City. He admitted he's always been a troublemaker, which earned a few chuckles from the royal family, especially when I jumped in to share some of the chaos he dragged me into over the years. But I always wanted to be a hero, Keenan said quietly, to help people, to protect others, to stand against those who hurt people like me. That's why I wanted to become a paladin. He paused, then added, to join you need a paladin to vouch for you. Drama's the only one I know, so it must have been him, though he never actually told me. He hesitated, then added, although it didn't quite go how I imagined. His voice softened. I wasn't given power to destroy my enemies. Instead, I was given power to heal. The room grew still, the weight of his words settling over us. The spell I used, it's incredibly rare, only granted to a select few, and as far as I know, it hasn't been bestowed in over 200 years. What was the name of the spell? Brahm asked. Oh, Keenan said almost absent-mindedly, lay on hands. Funny thing is, I didn't even know what it did until I used it. His tone shifted slightly, and I caught it. There was something he wasn't saying. I knew better than to ask about it now, but I made a mental note to bring it up later. The king leaned back and laughed, gesturing towards his wife. See, Aaron, even the universe wants to keep you alive. At least someone outside our family does, she replied with a soft smile. Keenan's expression turned serious. I'd appreciate it if you didn't spread this around. If the wrong people find out, I could become a target. Brahm grinned and clapped him on the shoulder. Of course. And after what you've done, you're part of this family now. Just then a knock came at the door. A guard stepped inside, and Brahm turned to Keenan with a smile. I have a surprise waiting in your room, he said. Curiosity sparked between us, and we quickly stood to follow him. After brief farewells to his family and Thalion, the king, Victus, Keenan, and I made our way down the corridor. When we entered Keenan's room, we were greeted by several attendants standing on either side of a magnificent suit of armor. The king chuckled, eyes twinkling. "This was mine when I was your age," he said. "Now it's yours." The armor was breathtaking. Its polished surface gleamed with a silvery sheen, crafted from an alloy of mithril and silver. Engraved across the chest and pauldrons was the image of a dove with outstretched wings descending before a roaring lion. Delicate etchings traced every edge, glowing faintly with an azure shimmer. Keenan stood frozen. "It's beautiful," he murmured, eyes wide. "The smiths worked through the night to adjust the feet," Brum said, laughing, "since you are unique." Victus leaned in and whispered something to him, and the king nodded. "I've enjoyed our time together, but there's still much for me to do," he said, turning to us. "Know this, you're always welcome here. I've instructed the staff to prepare provisions for your journey back to Grissom." We exchanged farewells, and Keenan thanked him sincerely for the armor. Once the king had gone, I turned to Keenan with a look. "All right, talk." "About what?" he asked, trying to sound innocent. "The spell," I pressed. "How did you know how to use it? I saw you look at the shield first. What was that about?" Keenan glanced over at the shield resting on the stand. His expression tightened. He muttered something under his breath, then sighed. "Fine." "What?" I asked, confused. He studied the shield for a long moment, then nodded to himself and said quietly, "The shield told me to use the spell." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. Then I laughed. "Okay, that's funny, but seriously, how did you know?" He didn't smile. "The shield told me," he repeated, dead serious. The laughter caught in my throat. "You're not joking." He shook his head. "No." "The shield told you," I echoed, still trying to process. I squinted at him. "You're serious?" He nodded once more. "How can his shield talk?" I asked, incredulous. "I don't know," Keenan admitted, "but I have a hunch. I read once about a group of paladins centuries ago who imbued their spirits into weapons to protect the world. The weapons were said to have special powers and the ability to communicate with their wielders, maybe even others, though I'm not totally sure." He stared at the shield, a mix of awe and disbelief on his face. "Thinking back," I said, "wait, that would explain—" "Yes," Keenan cut in. "Your uncle's reaction when he saw the shield." "This is insane," I muttered, shaking my head. "You're telling me," Keenan chuckled. "I didn't believe it either at first. I thought I was losing my mind. But in that moment it was the shield, colorfully and rudely, I might add, telling me to use lay on hands." I laughed. "Well, at least it would get along with grog." Keenan sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, running his hand through his hair. "Why me, though?" he muttered. "There's nothing special about me. Why did I get the shield? Why lay on hands? I just don't get it." I walked over and sat beside him. "Man," I said quietly, "I don't know why all this is happening, but I'd rather it be you than anyone else in the world." He glanced at me, eyes glistening. "Come on, man." "I'm serious," I said with a smile. "You saved those people. You saved the Queen. That's proof enough for me." At that moment, a voice echoed through the room. "Oh, for crying in public, is this how you two are going to be all the time?" Startled, we both looked around. The room was empty. And then it hit me. It was the shield. "Ugh, you two are duller than a butter knife," the voice continued. "Yes, it's me, and for the love of all the celestials in the heavens, I chose this one and all I get is waterworks. Next time you want to have a sweet, heartwarming moment, leave me in the hallway." I stared, then burst out laughing. "Wait, so you can't hear us if you're in another room?" The shield replied, "I can always hear Kay. We're telepathically linked now. Which sucks for me, by the way, but I guess I'll manage." Keenan scowled. "I liked you better when you were quiet." The shield laughed. "Now you're getting it. But first, I'm done with being called the shield. Ugh, the shield this, the shield that. No respect. My name is Merrick Ironguard, 3rd Paladin of the First Order." A pause followed. Keenan and I exchanged puzzled looks. Merrick let out a dramatic sigh. "You should both be impressed, but whatever. I guess we'll just have to make the most of the situation. Oh, and if you see Grog, kick him for me. Better yet, push him down a flight of stairs, outing me in public like that. He's lucky I'm stuck in this shield or I'd thrash him in the pits." "Wait, what?" I asked, startled. I'm done talking," Merrick said. "Wake me up if there's a fight." No amount of prodding got him to speak again. Keenan and I sat there in stunned silence before finally bursting into laughter. Either we were both losing our minds, or Keenan really did have one of the sacred weapons. With our spirits lifted, we packed our belongings and joined a caravan headed back to Grissom City.